expertise, which is really a differentiator in the market. We try to get involved very early with entrepreneurs and help them grow their business from whether it's IP protection, financing needs, giving guidance how to structure the infusion of capital, and then growing with companies over time to continuing to access the capital markets to successful exit either through the M&A channel or through the IPO channel. So we're, again, happy to welcome you all here today. We'd love the opportunity to chat with any of you who may think that we can help. We're both on the investor side as well as on the company side, not at the same time. But again, welcome and look forward to another great event with Plug In.
Excellent. So one thing to note before we start, and John will take it from there. We don't do name tags here. So go introduce yourself, shake someone's hand. If you're shy, either Jonathan or Ayla over there, we'll be happy to introduce you around. It's very casual and informal. So with that, John.
So I'm Jonathan Shavitz with the Industry Index. I'm going to be moderating this morning, and I'm going to just ask everyone to just quickly go around and introduce themselves briefly. Before I do, I just want to start with Michael from ProHouseca. We've been working with ProHouseca on and off, well, I'm going back probably a couple of companies in terms of my relationship with them, and have asked them to help us in bringing together the right group of people. So Michael, you want to quickly start, then we'll go to Stephanie.
All right. So Michael Stokel, thanks for the intro with ProHouseca Consulting. I run our global tech strategy and publisher operations. So as a consultancy, we have verticals where we have technology vendors as our customers, publishers, buyers, trade groups. So obviously I run the technology vendor piece, which is mostly ad and marketing technology companies. We'll help them with go-to-market strategies, we'll help them with competitive analysis and things like that. And then within the publisher vertical, where this kind of comes into play for something like header bidding, really yield optimization is pretty much 99% of what we do in publisher optimization, our publisher operations. And my sell on the company is, as a non-sales marketing person is we like to get shit done. We like to get our hands in the soil and not just talk strategy, but actually help folks improve their yield and get those CTMs fill rates up and things like that.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Laser. I'm the Director of Advertising Technology at News Corp. I've been working doing header bidding at various companies and also was consulting and did some work with ProHouseca, specifically header bidding strategy. Yeah, excited to talk about it.
Hey, I'm Mike Hannon. I'm the VP of Yield and Revenue Optimization at Perch.
Speak up a little bit, Mike. I know you can.
I run all the revenue operations on both the direct and programmatic side of the house.
Hi, I'm Megan Latham. I'm the Global Head of Advertising Operations at Bloomberg. Run a few teams, programmatic, all the trafficking teams, ad technology, ad product, pricing and inventory, and planning and campaign management over there.
Hey everyone, I'm Matthew Lehman with Syntech Media. I'm Director of Exchange Monetization there. We work with small to medium-sized publishers and optimize their programmatic stack.
Doug Laritano from Media.net, run the team here in New York. Media.net is a unique demand source leveraging Microsoft Search demand in display. Work with a lot of publishers and operate a large server-to-server header bidding platform.
Hi, I'm Tom Pichardo. I'm the Director of Product Marketing at PubMatic. I lead our go-to-market strategy for a lot of our ad decisioning, audience, and data products.
Hi, I'm Bill Elena. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at the Meet Group. We are a mobile app publisher, so our inventory is really almost 100% in-app. So the header bidding story is a little different than what most of you guys are going to be talking about.
I'm Maggie Newell. I'm VP of Enterprise Accounts Global and North America at MediaMath. So I consult with enterprise companies, marketing teams, and their agency partners, as well as agencies directly on their programmatic strategy.
Hi, I'm Eric Caparo. I'm the CEO of Beeswax, also on the buy side. We have a little buy side thing going on. Very involved in ad tech for the last 15 years. Love talking about it.
Hi, I'm Rohit Bagalkot. I am the director on the Precision team, which is, if you read the recent Ad Exchange articles, are PMX and Publicis' new self-service programmatic media buying arm. I am the director on telecom, ISP, and entertainment categories, and I lead programmatic strategy and buying for those accounts, etc.
And again, I'm Jonathan Shavitz. I'm the president of Industry Index. Industry Index is a ratings, research, and review site. We have a panel of 55,000 brands and agencies that we survey and do content development on behalf of technology companies, as well as have some other information products. And we're launching a new website in July, so be on the lookout for that. In terms of format today, we try to keep things casual, that we have a lot of talent and thoughts around the table. But if there are people in the participant group that would like to throw a question in, jump in, you know, I'll be opening it up, so please participate. We're talking about header bidding this morning. It is, I think I wrote my first blog post calling header bidding is the new black about 2 years ago. And I wrote another one last year, so this has been a hot topic, but it has, I think, reached the critical mass point in which everybody knows what it is. We're not going to drill deep into the mechanics of header bidding this morning, except as it helps delineate the differences between browser and server to server. Suffice it to say, from my perspective, header bidding is hot because it's giving publishers access to more demand, and it's giving publishers access to more demand and increasing yields. And on some level, it may be changing the information dynamic, shifting things back more towards the publisher's perspective in terms of they have different types of access to information. With that being said, I want to just start with a very quick definition of what's the difference between browser and server to server. And you want to jump in, or I'll call on somebody?
I'll volunteer.
Okay.
So first generation header bidding was browser, so it was JavaScript on the page, managing the demand sources, which you should call what sort of timeouts you allow, what priorities you had. And the disadvantage of that was that if you wanted to change, you needed to open up the code and have someone muck around with it and see if it worked. Server side header bidding is, in theory, the header's still on the page, but only makes one call to a server that then has many auctions that take place to all different demand sources and manages latency and priorities, etc. So the shift to server side gives the publisher one source of control, potentially with the tools they need to manipulate the demand sources and the latency without having to change the code or otherwise, radically alter their ad ops operations.
Yeah, I think a couple other key differences is that with browser side, there is a limitation to the number of calls. There's obviously like latency problems, and due to second price auctions, it's not really a truly unified market still.
Anyone have any other comments or differences?
Well, I would just add that it's important to note that those calls from the client side are all happening from the user's machine. So individual calls to individual demand sources. So obviously, like we just threw out the word latency, but browsers were not made to operate like this. The way that browsers are made to show content to the user, not to do all these kind of complex ad tech calls that just take time. So that's why the shift to the server side is important. It's also worth noting, and I say this as working for a company that runs a server-to-server header bidding platform, that the only true server-to-server platform would be what Google's trying to build with EBDA, since it's actually coming from the ad server. Otherwise, server-to-server platforms like Media.net are actually enabled by a client-side code. Still on.
Well, and in addition to that, I think it's important also to keep in mind the mobile aspect and the data usage. So it's another driver where at PubMatic, 70% of our impressions are coming from mobile, and that's not, I'm sure, unique to us. I'm sure across publishers, most of your viewers or users are on mobile, and mobile data plans, right? When all that data is being eaten up by the advertisers, it's something that really affects like the business of publishers.
Also worth noting, the main disadvantage of server to server, the reason why it's not a no-brainer in many cases is that it requires the cookie matching to take place. In client side, every demand source has access to the user's machine and can read their own cookies. In server-to-server, you're reliant on the server wrapper matching with the demand source's cookies, so you're going to take 20-30% hit on yield on that match.
Or the efforts for a unified ID that I think some of the folks in this table are participating in is that I see that as I don't know if it was thought of for server-side header bidding, but it seems to be what could possibly address that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up mobile because I had that thought as well where, I mean, cookie matches is a solvable problem. It takes time, but like we see upwards of like 90-95% matches with some of our partners at this point. But, it's almost like the real future is kind of people-based identification across devices. That's what we're moving to, and I think having people, you could almost like leapfrog it into that, where you could reach people across mobile and desktop and have a more unified experience as well.
And I think from the publisher side, right now, before we get to that point, what we were weighing, talking server to server versus is that, do we pick the slight revenue hit versus the latency? And to us, the user experience was more important, so we decided to go server to server. We'll take a slight revenue hit. That might not be everybody's choice, but I think that is your decision. And it's a small decision on each end, but you have that. And to me, the user should be the choice for our brand, so that was our choice.
Sure.
We did the same thing, as a publisher. We went, started 4 years ago, client side, moved to a wrapper, and at the end of last year, we went fully server to server. Even removing someone as large as Amazon being top buyer, we realized that we could bring in enough demand. We actually worked with over 30 different bidders today, all server to server. That actually closed that revenue gap.
Yeah.
Right? So we actually didn't see an actual decrease in overall revenue because we have so many bidders. But you're right, it comes down as a publisher to the user.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that even if we look before header bidding, exchanges and SSPs had to cookie match with DSPs and networks. So the cookie match issue for server to server is just that there's an additional hop, and we all know, even with kind of old school waterfalling SSPs and what have you, every additional hop is going to have some loss, but that loss could be mitigated. So, a 20 to 30% revenue hit is not what our publishers see, and like Mike said, you can very easily add more demand sources that really will kind of kind of make up for any loss there. So we typically see cookie match rates with demand partners for publishers using our platform being within 5% of where that demand partner would be if they were on the page. And then the revenue loss, like I said, usually is made up for the fact that a publisher is going to add more demand sources.
Well, too, I was going to say a publisher who's very conscious about user experience anyway is going to put their timeouts low on client side. So you're actually taking a hit already and missing out on bids. So the difference is not.
I have a quick question for you in terms of you're working with 30 demand
You're one of
sources, right? So, and this goes a little bit away from header bidding, right? But it's tangential to it. Controlling transparency, controlling ad quality and fraud and spoofing, right? So, because I've spoken to publishers that actually want to limit the number of demand sources, right? Because they're seeing spoofing of their URLs, and it's difficult to find out where it's coming from when you're working with 30 partners.
Yeah.
So, is that trading one problem for another?
It's hard. We do make sure when we light up every individual demand source that we've got solid terms in place, right? We do make sure that we're not duplicating, right? I don't want to find my supply multiple times in Programmatic as an example, right? Or Nexus, right? So we're making sure that we're not duplicating. Yeah, we run into the same issues as everybody else with malware and things like that. So I think it's definitely becoming a more difficult thing. We're working, we worked with the Media Trust and Ad Lightning, and now we're talking to Confiant, right? to try to get ahead of a lot of that stuff. We're making pretty good progress.
How do you make sure you're not duplicating?
Again, a lot of it comes down to terms and contracts, right? There is no way to be 100% positive with it, but we do work pretty closely with each demand source to make sure it's not happening. I mean, it does pop up. We just had a pop up the other day where we were seeing Nexus demand coming in outside of Nexus, right? So we shut that guy down. Right?
Would this be approach you recommend for small and medium-sized publishers? I think you might have more resources and more skilled individuals to be able to address that.
Yeah.
It might not be something you translate to. Small
it's
folks.
Mike, you deployed your own.
We
right?
did, so
I think it's important to
Yeah.
note
Sure.
that Perch has their own solution in place,
Right.
as opposed to using an outside
Right.
vendor.
We built our own proprietary platform. It's called Ramp, a revenue ad management platform. We built it about 3.5 years ago. Over 90% of our inventory, and we're a fairly large publisher with over 100 million uniques, where over 90% of our inventory was back then being sold to a third party. And so we said, wow, we really need to figure out how do we create something that can drive the highest yield possible. And then the next thought was really, how do we get to true market value of our inventory? And really we thought, well, if we can create the most bid density that there possibly can be, that's going to get us there. We do write dynamic price floors. We have a pricing algorithm that comes into play, again, to really get us to true market value. For a small publisher, a medium publisher, yeah, I still think that that's a requirement. Right? You need to have significant bid density in order to get to true market value. So I don't think it's out of reach of any size publisher, to be honest with you. Obviously, a lot of it does have to do with what your sell-through is. Right? If you're selling 95% of your inventory, probably not worth your time. But so that's how we look at it.
I think I've always looked to you guys as kind of somebody who's doing it right, but not many people could copy what you're doing.
Sure,
because
thanks.
you guys you're a technology company that is also a publisher.
Yeah.
That's the way I view
Yeah.
you guys. And always talk a lot with your management and what have you.
Sure.
I just think you're doing some good things.
Thank you.
I think for most publishers, it would be very difficult to copy. And I think that's why there are companies like me that.
Well, and I agree with that, right? I mean, I've had publishers come to me asking about licensing or tech, things like that. And then you have people come back and it's like, okay, how would we, if we did license to someone, how would we pay for it? And they hear what those fees would be, and like, well, we'll just build it ourselves.
Right.
And literally, it's like, okay, have fun.
And you have to operate it. You have to operate. I think that's what's generally lost in a lot of conversations around header bidding, is that the initial kind of wrapper client side product that was kind of pushed to market was it's a free product. And I always like to say there's nothing that's free. So those that are operating those products probably have some sort of advantage. And that leads to kind of a lower value for the publisher. So now most server-to-server platforms have some sort of cost behind it, because it takes a lot to actually operate it, and Mike and guys at Perch know that. And I think right now that's kind of one of the interesting back and forth, and to be honest with you, it's something that we struggle with. We love working with publishers. We'd want to work with every single publisher. We work with some great ones, but others are like, oh, but I have a free option. And I'm like, okay, good luck with that, and they come back to us when you're ready.
Well, it depends how hands-on they are with that free option. Like,
Sure.
there's definitely free options that are out there that they can implement and kind of set it and forget it and put their complete reliance in. And I think there are also free options on client-side header bidding that if you have smart, savvy enough people who can use the code and understand whether or not things are being prioritized, then you're in a good place. But a matter of getting good, smart tech resources at publisher is very difficult, right? So it sometimes requires bringing in, extra people to take review, to review it, make sure that nobody's being prioritized, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Stephanie and I were just talking last week about some of the things that they've been doing on their end, which is like, okay, let's work in pre-bid, great. Okay, well, let's work through somebody like A9, right? Oh, well, we watched our ECPMs drop, right, because of user matching. Okay, but there's more to that picture, right? Which is, well, did you reduce your latency, right? Did you increase engagement, right? Or are there more page views, right? What else is actually happening? And to that point, there's more research you need, right, to really understand it. It's not just set it and forget it.
Yeah,
There's a lot of work that goes into it.
Yeah, we were talking a lot about how there's like all these off-the-shelf like header bidding analytics platforms that they're like, oh, plug all this in and we're going to show you exactly like how your page works. But you need more than that. You can't just like be looking at all your demand sources in DFP, right? Other stuff is happening beyond that. So you have to be pulling in your data from, you know, how fast your page is running, like pulling in New Relic data, or what's your bounce rate, are your page views going up and down? Like, you have to start to, we've for too long been looking at like engineering and page experience separately than advertising, and that's where we've gotten ourselves into a lot of issues. So if we can start looking at ourselves on a daily basis, holistically, and getting the teams to work closer together, that was one of the things that kind of I've been standing on at News Corp, trying to get our teams to communicate better on an operations side and an engineering side.
Does part of that point to the limitations of the exchange model? Meaning, in some ways exchanges were supposed to give you those analytics and supposed to give you transparency into your data, not necessarily all the page behavior issues, but they're supposed to give you things, and yet a lot of publishers that use what I'll call a traditional exchange are still complaining about their inability to understand what's going on.
I feel like, you know, when exchanges first started, there was an idea that there'd be one or two exchanges. And I think that we've seen there are like now so many options on the supply side in terms of SSPs and whatnot. And that's when it gets tricky. Anytime you're kind of in that chain, that there are multiple people, you're limited in kind of what you can provide. Because there is so much going on, and it's happening on the, you know, on the browser rather than in their system.
Well, the question is when multiple SSPs see all of the exact same impressions. I mean, a lot of it's duplicate demand, right?
Yeah.
So DSPs are bidding on 10 different SSPs. At what point does everything just collapse?
Well, clearly there are too many SSPs. I mean, like, that's just obvious.
And
right?
we've done some experiments on our side, you know, because of all this swirl about unification and community SSPs creating the same inventory. And we've seen that there's barely any drop when you especially focus on the top 2 or 3 large ones. You know, we were talking about, you know, how that might change when you're dealing with a large publisher versus smaller publishers, where they might have some differentiated demand because of all the work that they've done and actually spent time building those relationships. But for the most part, and it goes back to how we might even use this from a buyer and how we might look at placing all of these trends within, you know, what we do on the buy side, and convey that back to our clients, which is not easy. Like sitting in this room and having these conversations might be, you know, second nature to us. But you know, when we take all of this back to and match those to real media dollars and explain it to, you know, someone who's trying to meet a KPI about completion rates or, you know, driving net new customers, we have to do a lot of this in the back end where we try and, you know, figure out these issues. But yeah, you know, to your point about, you know, there being too many SSPs and when does it collapse, we're already trying to preempt that a little bit just by doing all of these, you know, tests just to make sure that we are keeping pace with, you know, clearly what's clearly a sales side phenomenon.
So wait, so you are seeing the same demand through multiple SSPs, or you aren't?
We
You
are.
said that barely, yeah. Okay.
Supply.
Supply.
From our
Supply.
perspective,
Yeah.
supply.
But so if you think about it, like Maggie said, like we thought that there were going to be a few exchanges. I think part of the reasons why it's kind of multiplied and what have you is that nobody did anything that was purely what they said it was going to be. So the idea behind second price auction is that that's the most elegant way to kind of get, you know, value for both the buy and the sell side. But every single exchange put some sort of spin or variant on that second price auction, And therefore, then DSPs started to run their own auctions internally to reduce bid density, and that even complicated the problem. And now we have header bidding that is like, so it's really like a complete mess. And I do think that we're headed for some sort of a collapse. And you know, the interesting thing to me is like, where do we get to a point? How do we get to a point where it's just like a real market? That there aren't these kind of weird variants introduced into the system, whether it's you know, dynamic floors on the SSP side or multiple auctions being run for the same impression, whether it's DSPs running their own internal auctions, whether it's folks that are running an exchange also having a demand source that they're just cherry picking where they need to. If all that went away and it was actually just like a real market, then we wouldn't need all of this.
Well, the other thing too I was going to say is that you think about everything up to this point. I kind of feel like it's always been to the advantage of the buy side, right?
Buyers, sellers.
There shouldn't be an advantage either way, though.
I
There
agree.
shouldn't be.
Yes.
It should be a market.
Well, but the problem is you don't know what an impression's worth until you actually serve an ad on it.
Well,
That's,
go ahead.
that's
So
what
I-
the
so-
way it is.
Yeah, it's just like you don't know.
So
You
the
don't
second
know.
part of that is, I'm finally feeling like I'm getting back some control, right, at this point, right, where I have the ability to pull levers and make decisions to, again, get the true market value of my inventory, without pricing myself out of the market, whatever that market is, right? We did come up with a strategy. We focus on three things as a publisher, which is yield, speed, and transparency. So you talk about one SSP when providing analytics, like, okay, now I have 30 plus, and we've worked with Meta Markets to actually consolidate all of our data, so I can actually go into a dashboard now and say what is actually happening across my programmatic landscape, across all of my properties. It's a lot of data. Right? It is a lot of data, and I can go down to an individual advertiser and say, where is that demand coming through? Understand the different price points. Understand everything about that advertiser and what they're doing, what they're buying.
Wait, but if the advertiser's name is spelled differently in every one of these.
No, you just.
There's no way you get to that.
You
Even
normalize
their
it.
name, they
You
can't get that
normalize
many
it.
different-
You can normalize it. We do.
It's gotten much better than it
Well,
used
I
to
think
be.
that's an important point, right? Because where header bidding is going is moving beyond just that binary of this impression, this bid response was higher than this one, right? You have relationships with advertisers, and you might want to choose a certain demand source beyond just price, right? You might have access to additional data or guarantees for volume, right? That helps your forecasting.
Yeah.
So you need header bidding to start to offer that amount of data so that you can make your selling more sophisticated than just.
Yeah, and for us, it's always been about, well, it's about money at the end of the day,
Yeah.
right? But what I want to make it so that however the buy side wants to buy, that I can make it available to them.
Yeah.
So if they want to go through PubMatic, they can get me. If they want to go through Index, they can get me. If they want to buy programmatic direct through AdX, they can get me. Right? I don't ever want there to be some door closed that they can't buy from me. Because at the end of the day, I don't really have any significant loyalty to any specific SSP or exchange, or it's about the buyers, right? It's people spending the money that I care about.
Well,
It's the same.
I-
It's the same approach I think we take to the
Yeah.
market too, because at the end of the day, we're trying to match our audiences with the right message at the right time, and it's just many ways to do that. And I mean, if the perception was that the buy side was always at an advantage, because we could value our impressions against a set KPI, then that's true. And as long as we know how much we value an impression and have the right price for it, we're okay with the sell side getting as much transparency and trying to figure out the best way to generate the most yield.
Yeah, I was gonna say it almost like echoes what we deal with in the demand side. You know, when we're seeing more marketers demand transparency, and because they demand it, they're starting to get it now. I think fundamentally, like a unified market solves a lot of these problems. So, that's why we also preach consolidation and stuff to marketers. And I think demand side would love a unified market. You know, it's good for both of us.
Absolutely.
So I think it's good you're feeling more in control, and I think, you know, publishers really have a place where they can stand up and start to, you know, kind of demand these
Absolutely.
things to help move
And
the industry along.
I think to help that, platforms, like where we're seeing things going is, we have to fade into the background and just be the infrastructure, just be the pipes,
Mhm.
right? That's what's putting the pressure on some of the exchanges that operate on this arbitrage model. When you're involved in the price setting, then you're too in the mix. It should just be transparent between buyer and seller, platforms fade into the background as the infrastructure.
It's the technology piece.
Exactly.
The piece. Yes.
I think it's important to point out why we don't have a unified marketplace, and that's because DFP's decisioning mechanism is not up to date with how buyers want to buy.
Right.
In what ways?
Well, DFP literally decisions on pace, right? So it's like, okay, we have X amount of impressions over this time period, and we're going to just, on this publisher, space it out and serve all these impressions. Buyers don't buy like that anymore, right? And so, because of Google's place in the market, and because how they could integrate their own, you know, SSP within DFP, it made it so that we had to create a way that all of these different SSPs could actually push their price through. And that's why client-side header bidding existed, because it was almost like, oh, we have to basically trick DFP into reading what our CPM is.
It's funny,
right?
having like 1,000 line items,
Yeah,
it
and
just like boggles
and
my
only
mind
at
that
that
that's how we
point,
do it.
only at that point, where we were all like, we've been asking for this, because publishers, you know, I've been doing this since the beginning of RTB, and publishers have always been like, how can I get like the dream, which is all of my demand sources compete on a one-to-one basis against each other, right? And you just couldn't do it in DFP, and so you're playing with like the dynamics of supply and demand, and you're flooring to try and get the most out of your waterfall, and then eventually it was like, okay, well, now I can actually get everyone competing on a head basis against each other. And then Google was like, wait a second, this isn't fair. I'm not getting as much, now AdX is paying more money for things. Oh, I'm gonna launch EPDA.
Yeah,
Right?
I think, well, that's
so-
why I think transparency is really important. Like, there has to be like a co-opetition model, and for the supply sides to be able to work together to like make this happen, it has to be like grounded in transparency and trust.
Yeah.
If you think about the financial markets model, even though there's obviously a lot of centralization, there is transparency about price and about quality. I mean, the value of a share of Apple is the value of a share of Apple. Here we have a lot more dynamics going on, but we are clearly moving towards better cookie matching, in which we may never approach 100%, but we're well past that 20-30% rate that we were at a few years ago. So my question is, first of all, Stephanie, thank you, because I agree, if you can't have this conversation without putting Google in the middle of this, because the way that they behave, and I will add now, Amazon may also be in the middle of a lot of these things because of the way that they're expressing their own demand and the movements that they're making. And of course, we should throw Facebook in as well, just to make sure that we're talking about where the market is going as opposed to where the market has been. Who's losing? As this transition occurs, Google is changing their model in order to respond to it. Who are the winners and losers as this? I mean, I think it is. It's washed over the shore at this point. So, what's going to be left?
I mean, SSPs have a very difficult time being able to differentiate themselves if all of the supply amongst publishers is theoretically the same, right?
Yeah, I think Michael said, oh, well, I'll take any SSP as long as the demand comes from them. That's a definition of a commodity.
But to be fair, SSPs and exchanges didn't change. Like, they didn't innovate.
But the reason they exist is an inefficient market. Like, it used to be, SSP existed because a salesperson convinced someone to put a tag in their ad server.
Right.
That's gone, right? And now there's the SSPs. Actually, you can argue that the primary function of an SSP is to yield manage for the publisher. That works against header bidding. The better you are at yield management, the less you win in the header.
Right.
So arguably, you'd be best off with an SSP who did zero yield management, only did control and reporting and payments, which are all commodities also.
By the way, it's been like this for a while. We didn't all used to work with 300 different networks. because we like Bob at this network, right? We're working because they paid us money.
Here's a question, how, for the sell side, how soon until you take the media map tag in your header, no SSP? Beeswax, we're too small, you're not gonna take my header soon, but you guys are pretty big. I would do it.
Already happened.
Yeah.
So that.
I would love to,
But-
So does that then, already happening, I'm certainly aware of some other kind of ComScore 200 publishers that are replicating the perch model, saying, you know what, we're just gonna run this ourselves. We know there's an infrastructure cost, we're gonna run it ourselves, or we're gonna go to a provider, a technology provider, who's gonna charge them on a CPM basis for pipes, right? It's not a percentage. So, I mean, that crushes the current model for SSP exchange, right? Because they're making their money
In the auction.
in the auction
Yep.
and on the highest value impression.
Right.
So the highest value impression, ComScore 200 is gonna bypass the exchange, is that consensus here?
I mean, that's tricky because, when you integrate an SSP, they already have 60 different demand sources or how many ever they have set up within their platform. If you start cutting people out, like, yeah, you can do it one at a time, but then you have to manage 60 integrations with a DSP, which sounds like a lot for a publisher to
What-
do when they're
what if a
trying to
tech-
be focused on
What if
creating content. and
What if a
execution.
tech platform had all of those integrations but didn't run some sort of strange variant of a second price auction?
Like in just a first price auction?
No, just a pipe, or just a pipe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's where we have to move as like
Not a what
SSPs
if,
or platforms.
Not a what if.
Yeah, it's just like,
Yeah, I know.
like a SaaS model, right? Just
Mhm.
moving over to a SaaS model, providing the technology infrastructure, and then as publishers, then you really have to evaluate what is the value, because we have to provide value. And there's too much of a muck going on to just really identify what is the value that you're bringing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess at this point, publishers do see some value in duplicative demand across multiple different SSPs. And inefficiency on the buy side.
But it's funny because
But
like,
that'll collapse eventually,
yeah,
'cause
because
it'll
we
work itself
integrate
out.
with all of
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's
I mean,
kind of like-
so but I don't think it's reached, like, I don't think at this point, from my dollars, it has, like, I haven't seen it reach its, like, critical peak where everybody's kind of figured it out.
I think CPMs are gonna go up as the buy side gets smarter, right? And reduces that inefficiency, becomes more efficient. It just makes sense, right? So, because I've heard from other people like, well, you know, once this stuff starts to collapse, CPMs are gonna drop. I'm like, it sounds the opposite to me, right? We're gonna reduce all that additional cost that's sitting out there, right? By meeting that plugging directly into me, they don't have to pay these additional fees that are happening in the middle. They can spend more with me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well-
Reduce waste.
So the buyers spend less and the sellers get more.
Well, also, though, you know, the fact that we really felt from header bidding on the demand side was the ability to really sell in full funnel customer lifecycle
Sure.
management. And we've seen advertiser ROIs increase as a
Sure.
result of that, and that just means more demand into, you know, more money into digital, more money into
Yeah.
programmatic in general.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we're also looking at seeing how we can negate the rise of CPMs because publishers value commitments upfront too.
Sure.
There's a value in having a long-term relationship
Yeah.
where if we are smart enough to go back and figure out, you know, sort of like a futures market and see how much demand can we actually push to you guys and be as transparent as possible, because if you look at how you're buying across multiple channels and multiple campaigns, if you kind of aggregate all of that and come to you guys with a clear direction on how much money there is on the table, I think there's ways to kind of prevent the volatility that we tend to see today.
We started messing with that. When I say we work in dynamic price floor stuff now, 3 years ago we didn't, right? We were doing it very manually, right? Starting in AdX and looking at, of course, this is such a good idea. Let's start with our largest buyer. Great idea. And we literally said, let's keep bumping up the price floor, right? We know what their max bid is, right? And let's figure out how much pressure can we put on them.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they disappeared. And we're like, oh, wait a minute, what just happened? Right? It's like, well, we didn't consider their back-end metrics, right? We don't know what kind of value they're looking for. Yeah, they might be willing to pay $20 for that CPM, but not all the time, right? And so, again, we've obviously automated this now with algorithms and things like that, but it's like we know that there is a breaking point for every buyer, Again, that's why we focus on getting to true market value, right? You can't price yourself out. And it's that transparency. We want to work with our largest buyer. We want to work with all of our buyers, right, to understand what are they trying to achieve. And again, just being as transparent as we possibly can, because there is no real secret here, right? There's still, at the end of the day, some KPI that needs to be met by the buyer.
I think there's also a forcing function in that this duplication QPS problem. So on the sell side, you folks institute header bidding. Now suddenly on the demand side, we're the victim. We're now seeing 7 auctions for the exact same impression instead of 1.
Sure.
Our AWS bills go up quite a bit, and the others the best we can do from a technical perspective is some sort of really gross optimization where we just throw out duplicates randomly. It's very hard to do. And so the inevitable next step is what we've been talking about, which is we have to have closer relationships with the publishers so we can identify which path is the best to get to that inventory and throw out all the duplicative paths.
We've even started ourselves, we've created an algorithm on the sell side of it, right, in our auction to actually understand, this algorithm basically, because we've got 30 plus bidders in the auction, to understand, as an example, let's say that every time we show Pubmatic an impression against a left-handed golfer, they never bid on it, right? So we will exclude them from the auction, right? So I think it's something around the lines of 30 plus bidders, only about 10 end up actually competing on a given basis, but we make that decision to reduce the amount of buyers that we actually need to wait for it.
And there's similar strategies going on the SSP side,
Right.
also, right? Because we also have infrastructure costs of just sending out a ton of impressions that never get bid on. So there is that optimization going on the SSP side,
And then
which
you got guys like what, I think some, Toggle, right? These guys are
Yeah.
starting to try to sit in between to help.
Another company
Yeah.
is so.
Another company.
I'm sure AWS is loving this, right?
Everybody's got their own bucket there.
Yeah, why would they launch a server solution if?
Yeah, right.
Right,
I guess
and
that
nobody else
team
will
doesn't
make
speak to the
yeah,
AWS
they
team.
can, they can make all the money on AWS.
So, going back to this question about the exchanges, so right now the exchange model, the SSP model, has been some percentage of revenue. And the publishers have liked that because they viewed it as a no-risk way to sell remnant inventory, going back 4 or 5 years. And now, obviously, programmatic is moving, if not to a level competition with guaranteed, maybe even ahead of it. Does this collapse the SSP market? Is 2018 the year in which we drop a couple of the big players?
I think it's a matter of how much publishers want to start to hire and build things themselves from a technology perspective, right? Like I was saying before, it's going to take a team and it's going to take people to do direct server-to-server integrations with different DSPs to collapse the SSP market. And I just don't think I don't think for publishers.
2018, there's no way.
Yeah, there's
Yeah,
no way.
no
I
way.
just don't think that there's there's too much
There's
shit
too many
going on in
publishers out there
publishers
that
for
are
us to.
on the smaller side are still utilizing ad exchanges.
Yeah, but I'm thinking about the ComScore 200.
Yeah,
which
so outside of that,
But I
for the
don't-
folks that are
So
trying
there's
to grow.
there's value
and-
there's
and
value
grow that.
in a there's value for MediaMath to not have to plug into every single publisher.
Yeah.
So there's an opportunity for a platform that's not an exchange to actually do this.
Right, but if you're already plugged into MediaMath and you're plugged into Beeswax and you're plugged into the different demand sources, and effectively you're handing your wrap to the publisher, server to server, and you can make 30 calls and optimize it down to the 10 that purchased you, and basically. But they can,
But who controls that?
I was gonna say,
Yeah,
right,
that's the question.
Yeah.
It's their strategy and their buying decisions they're the ones that control it, right? So again, I sit here with 30 plus, we'll probably have 40 plus in the next 15 months of SSPs that, again, there's no offense to them, I don't care about any of them, right? So it's about these guys being able to reach me. So if they decide, and I say the buy side, that they're only gonna work through Pubmatic and Rubicon and Nexus as an example, great.
Or
That doesn't-
directly on your.
Or directly on my, however they decide to buy is what's gonna make the difference in that landscape.
Yeah, but that's why I think server side is, header bidding is an opportunity because, and you're right, it's a question of like who gets to play that privileged role, which I think goes back to like serious transparency and competition in the market needing to happen, but like, you know, we can route it through single source, and it helps efficiency because we're not bidding, you know, through multiple SSPs on basically the same opportunity and having it.
I think the more pointed question is not are SSPs going away, but what if, given there's actually now 2 tiers of SSPs. There's the traditional ones and then the ones who control the server-side wrapper, and they're not the same companies mostly. And so I think if we, to your point, a publisher doesn't need to build if they're working with a company that controls the server-side wrapper, and if you're an SSP who does not control the server-side wrapper, things don't look so good. Because
Isn't
you
the server-side wrapper just creating another SSP?
It is, but it's an SSP. It is, but it's
an
a.
SSP, yeah.
it's-
But it could be a
It's
different
creating a
SSP.
unified market,
It's creating
Right.
a unified
Unified
marketplace, but
marketplace.
it's creating an SSP that you're really just like putting a tag on the page and reaching directly out to.
So
You know, after your-
SSPs 5 years ago were making 40% margins.
Yeah.
It was the, you know, grand old days.
All day, golden days.
Header bidding actually forced them to reduce margins.
Right.
So because they actually were competing for each
Yeah.
impression.
Yep.
So margins went down closer to 20%. Now they were charging some fees on the buy side, they were taking some spreads when they probably shouldn't have, that may still be
They
happening.
were running 4 auctions for the same impression,
Exactly.
trying to inflate bids,
Now,
not naming any names.
if there's a future, if there's a future where there's a tech platform that aggregates demand from DSPs, which exchanges should have been to start, and does it at a lower cost, either an SSP that has
With
now gone from a,
transparency.
with
So,
transparency.
With transparency,
Yeah.
you can see the
If those SSPs that went from 40% margins to 20% margins can deal with going to probably 10% margins, then that's what should happen. Or like I don't think there is no 20% margin SSP future in my eyes.
Well, I look
There's
at-
not enough value.
Someone came to me and said, hey, can you tell me across all the different bidders that you have, what's the average rev share that you do with them? And I said, there's no such thing, because most guys I don't care about, I care about net bid.
Right. You care about net bid, right?
And so, at the end of the day, yeah, I don't necessarily have that transparency, but again, rev share is old school tag based, that's why they did it. On a net bid, it's again, I look at, put your best foot forward, and you're gonna compete against everybody else.
And if you have
and-
30 bidders, you're seeing enough expression of the overall market
Exactly.
that they can't,
So it
they
doesn't-
can't have a 20 or 30 or 40%.
Exactly, so it doesn't matter to me, right? So I tell everybody, it's like, no, don't come to me with a rev share contract, I don't wanna see that, I just want that bid.
We did an experiment. We went across a bunch of SSPs and we did a naive bid. We just bid $10
Sure.
and $50 budget. And then we called the publisher and said, how much did you get? The margins range from what the contract said with 1 or 2 players to 70%
Oh, sure.
take rate. And so if you're that SSP who took 70% of my money, or the publisher's money, really, it's not my money. They took the publisher's 70%. In a header bidding environment, that auction now loses and you get 0 because it never wins the auction.
That's why they
But
went
it
from
is-
40
but
to
it is
20%.
taking your money
Yeah.
too, because the performance of that ad is probably significant.
course.
You know what I
Of
mean?
course.
The viewability on that ad is probably lower, so it's taking both of our money.
Let's just assume I was smart by
It's
bidding
taking your
that.
Quick comment on the ComScore 200. You can't make the assumption, I mean, you know, Perch at its roots is somewhat of a technology player, right? Doug made that mention. You can't assume that within the ComScore 200 that, you know, even if they're large enough to have strong technology teams, they should be working, and they typically are working on things that are unique to that publisher, a content publisher, a news publisher. They should be using their internal technical resources on the things that make them unique, not on the things that could be somewhat a technical commodity. And what you do see is within the publishers that I've both worked for and that we've had as clients, we have large and small, some of those same technical constraints we see with the little guys you have with the big guys, because their tech folks either don't want to work on advertising because it's evil, or they're properly dedicated to things that, like I said, are unique about that publisher.
Well,
and I think that's a good majority of the Comscore 200.
It comes down to value. So what I was talking about before, like the margins of the exchanges or SSPs, were they creating that value? Same thing with you considering build or buy. Very few publishers, it makes sense for them to build, because it's not only the initial build and the cost of it, it's the continuous maintenance and upgrading. Like Mike has already talked about how they've vastly improved what they're doing over the last few years. That takes a team. That takes a big team, and that's I think there's a place for ad tech companies on the sell side to provide a lot of value. It just in the leading up to this point, I don't think that it hasn't been commensurate with the value that they're taking.
And starting with in-house ad servers, I mean, outside of extremely large publishers, it was just not economically viable. You just could not keep up with the industry. You don't know what's going to happen in 2 years.
Yeah.
And really, with these publishers, when they have to cut, that's one of the first places they go. They're not going to get rid of the salesperson. They're going to get rid of someone working on some technology that really the core of the company doesn't understand.
All right, I just want to go back to your experiment. I won't name who this was, but one of the SSPs that's deploying a wrapper has effectively been caught in which their win rate when they have the wrapper is 2, 3, 4, 5x their win rate when they are the adapter on the same publisher.
They're all in cans, so don't worry about it.
And everyone who's here, just so everyone understands, that should never happen. It's statistically impossible. So what does that mean in terms of, I mean, if you say the SSP can still provide value, where's the trust in that? If that is, the argument was, I'm going to outsource it, right? I'm going to hand it to somebody because I don't have the infrastructure and technology.
That was my point earlier about nothing's free.
Yeah.
Like that.
But that's not.
I don't know, I just don't trust anybody anymore.
No, but that's
I mean,
Why would
that's
you?
like solely why it was like, we're gonna go prevent.js, we're gonna make sure that we have like consultants that can take a look at the code, make sure it's not favoring any sort of like partner.
Yeah, I think that's where the publishers really have to push towards open source.
Yeah.
Right?
But that's
and
pretty
open
much
source
built.
to me, it's like
But that's pretty much
we're
built.
keeping,
Yeah.
we're keeping
That's like
the,
a hat-
we're
that-
keeping the
Yeah,
community,
it's
we're
one
keeping
step away
somebody
from it.
we're keeping each other in check,
No.
right?
you
That to
know-
me, that's what.
Is it
You
open
almost
source or
need
is
a
it
new
transparency?
entity. Yeah, I think it's transparency. You almost need a new entity, which is a platform to manage this that's willing to be transparent so people, the other partners can trust them.
Mhm.
And that I think is like fundamental to making it work.
So the definition of transparency, I think in this industry is getting out of control, because
Yeah.
the
I
people
mean-
that you were talking about, the whole wrapper
Yeah,
thing
we
that you
all
were just
know what I'm talking
discussing,
about, yep.
they like to talk about transparency.
Constantly,
Right.
constantly.
But that
So-
is
all
about
the
his
time.
own,
So when I say it, I mean specifically transparency around how the auction will work and to make sure it's like a fair ground for everyone.
Yep.
And I would say even like their margin, what
Sure.
the fee, like a technology fee for this service, like we said a pipe.
A co-op
that-
almost?
You kind of, I mean, we've done co-opetition in this industry before. OpenRTB
No, I mean,
is co-op.
yeah, but OpenRTB, people said that they were following the guidelines, but the guidelines were loose enough that you still had to modify your deployment a little bit. I want to just move a little bit towards kind of this market continues to move quickly, even with the decline of VC dollars. We continue to see lots of changes in the technology landscape. We've been talking primarily about display. 50, 60, 70, depends upon your number you want to pick, but the actual impressions are now coming from mobile. Where is mobile, and Bill, I know you guys are big in this space, where is mobile when it comes to header bidding? There is no header per se, it's pre-bid or.
Another bad term.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously we don't have a header, we don't have cookies, right, when you're dealing with an app. So what it does is it takes the whole mix and just kind of throws it up in the air and says, okay, everything that's been done on desktop you can't do in app. In-app becomes a much bigger challenge. The way I look at the in-app ads tech space right now is about 5 years ago on desktop. I mean, it's just, it's far behind, and being able to move and change in that space is much more difficult because of SDKs, because of everything has to be part of a build and resubmit to the Apple Store, Google Play Store, and it's much more challenging. So one of the things we're trying to do is work with most of the DSPs or exchanges, and many of them, to help build these kind of pre-bid tools. We know it was disruptive in desktop, right? MoPub being the AdX of mobile, particularly in app, needs to be pressed as well, and so we have a couple of kind of desktop legacy businesses that have a tool that we're integrated with now. Not doing great because I don't think they have the proper demand sources lined up, but coming out now is we're really close with Oath, who has one coming up. I don't know even what to call them right now. Millennial AOL, Next Age. So they have one that we're integrating at this point. I think Amazon has one coming, Facebook has one, and so they're all coming down. I think at that point we're going to really get a sense to see what's going on. But I'm really kind of obviously bullish on it. I think it should be able to help us, but it's so far behind.
Are you loading up all these separate SDKs?
We are, a couple are server side, so but that's our plan. I mean, we manage 10 to 12 SDKs at any one point. We have an awful lot of traffic. We have an awful lot of ad inventory. So when we look at this, it's little pennies matter. Moving CPMs a penny is worth a couple $1 million a year, right? Moving at 10 cents, fundamentally can add $20 million, basically bottom line cash. So adding an SDK, maybe creating a little more latency. It's we can do those kind of things, but I think at the end of the day, we optimize for revenue, right? Period. We optimize for revenue, not impressions, not CPMs. We look at those type of things and make those decisions, and it's certainly a balancing act. But
one of the things that's interesting about the mobile app market, interested in your opinion here, is that most of the quality demand is still not RTB. It's not direct, it's ad networks. Ad networks dominate mobile app because of this SDK relationship, and the big names like AppsFlyer or Tapjoy or Chartboost, they're all SDK and closed demand. And the movement to RTB is, even despite MoPub success, is on the margins not nearly as vital as important to business.
It's incredibly slow happening. Yeah, we agree, and part of the story with that, to not get into, we hear a lot of viewability, particularly in app. There's this massive concern about the viewability of ads, and everybody's pushing now viewability in all the SDKs. So every exchange has that, and we're rolling out. And we've all heard it. The promises that have been made about once you have viewability in, all the big brand dollars are going to come. It's going to explode. We push, we make those, prioritize them, and then nothing happens. Oh no, but they're coming.
Viewability is a cult.
Right. Yeah.
It is. It has nothing to do with anything.
No, I know. I'm on actually a panel tomorrow at Mobile Summit about viewability, and this is a discussion. It's all people talk about right now in the mobile and app space. And it feels like desktop about 2 years ago.
Yeah. Well, then they
It's
can move
just-
the- they can move the goalposts.
Do an analysis of the numbers, a largely non-viewable ad unit versus a pretty viewable ad unit, it's only about 20% more.
Yeah.
It's really not, and that was that's part of the issue with there's some trusted how am I trying to say this without being a jerk? There's some publisher consortiums that are trying to get together and sell trusted inventory through an exchange, and the problem is they only want to pay on viewable impressions, but that is a yield optimization nightmare, because from a publisher perspective, there is still value in ads that might have less of a chance of becoming viewable, but could still become viewable, and you can still make a significant amount of money.
The problem with viewability is anyone can just go up on a soapbox and say, well, I'm not paying for ads I can't see, and it's very hard to argue against that. But it's nonsense.
It's
nonsense
all the different
when you get into
players.
the details.
Yeah, all the different players, if you stack on one ad unit 6 different viewability players against each other, all of them will give you different numbers.
It's such a big error band
So it's-
that using it as a currency is insane.
Exactly.
And it's just,
And
let me have my soapbox one second.
what other media form is held to this standard? Either?
Right.
Do you know what I mean? It's nobody's oh, I have to staple you down to the couch so that you watch
Absolutely.
this
Or
ad.
a magazine, you gotta make sure you flip to
You
that
flip-
page.
oh, you didn't
or
skip
out-
the page
or-
yet.
And to Bill's point, the
It feels
idea that
even worse.
viewability
Yeah.
measurements was holding back in-app opportunities, it's a generational change. Marketers are missing out on marketing to an entire generation who just plays games on their phone and doesn't watch TV, and they're saying, oh, but it's not viewable. It's like,
Yeah,
okay,
you know,
great.
when it came up when it was a DR focused market, right, then that was an issue, right? Because if you're paying on a click, on an action, acquisition, that's not an issue. But now as brand dollars are moving towards programmatic, right, where like having that image displayed, like that's where like the issues come up and the tensions rise, right?
Well, I think we run into this a lot, and I agree. It's a call because what we see is that like from an optimization standpoint, it's often not correlated with actual like ROI or revenue for the advertisers. So that's what we really try to make clear to them. I think in terms of more premium supply, I agree that like as you go higher up in that funnel towards like awareness and stuff, viewability becomes even more of a topic. But the good thing with things like programmatic guaranteed is that it's usually going to be like the top of the page.
And then
you know?
measuring that ROI, right? That's
But,
another nightmare.
It's a nightmare.
The publishers, the larger group of publishers do have to look in the mirror. There were artificial impression, tactics that we're taking, especially in the world of guarantees and the direct sales. I mean, this has been going on for too long. The below the fold, auto refresh, crap like that. So the cleanup did have to occur. And we are at the point now where you're up at that higher end and you're using all the known tactics to minimize viewability. You are canceling on that app, but we're still digging too much into this, I won't call it the long tail because there's some good playing small guys, but we're still dealing in the corruption on the publisher side, which is intentionally artificial impressions. Now, how do we weed that out without hurting the guys who play the game?
Well, which is not an issue with premium publishers. It's an issue with, like, so.
But it's
So-
an
so
issue
to
with
me-
that,
so-
with
so
that
to
the
me,
ad networks,
to me
like
on
that.
my, yeah, so to me, from my perspective, like, premium publishers did not create the viewability issue, right?
Some did.
No,
I mean,
some
some-
did.
yeah.
I
mean,
End of the month,
Depends on who you vote for.
I got to hit my
Yeah,
numbers.
but that's so small
Well,
compared
but
to
they
the
turned
amount
up on-
of,
they
the
turned
amount
up
of
on,
garbage ads and like fraudulent shit that was going on
Yeah.
non-premium publishers, right?
Yeah.
But having like basically open RTV and being able to bid across the entire environment and just be able to have like someone place a tag in their ad server on, in their basement and put a bunch of ads, like 10 ads on the bottom, you know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff is what created the problem. Because I don't know any premium publisher, you might throw an extra ad like in an area that might not be as viewable, but that's not the vast majority of not viewable impressions.
Except on the 30th of the month.
I mean, I don't
Q4.
I-
Q4, there's
I
more
don't
impressions than
believe-
anything
I
else.
don't
Yeah.
believe that any premium publisher like does that many crazy things.
I don't
at
think
the
they
end
do
of the month.
anymore.
But
They're not- because they're
also
not-
we
they're
were
not
buying
structured.
traffic. A lot of publishers were buying source traffic.
Right.
Now you're going to the bad guys who are doing all that crazy stuff.
I was
with
gonna say
clicks.
that the
Yeah.
issue of viewability is the issue of fraud, and there's so many different pieces that we're still, as an industry, dealing with, in terms of spoofing and in terms of viewability and in terms of bots that we had a roundtable on that and we will again because it's always a good active discussion. I asked all of you to think of a number, and just for everyone here, it's an exercise that we would like to do. What's a number that's interesting about this space? So I'm gonna go around the room, I'm gonna ask you all to share both the number and why, and then we'll see where that leads.
Wait, I don't
Yeah, me
understand.
neither.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I never
like,
got
This
that.
didn't-
You get
okay,
that
so,
email?
Yeah.
I got 3 numbers.
You can
Oh,
share
sure.
one of her numbers.
Yeah, could you give me one of your numbers?
Oh.
Yeah, I can lend you a number.
So, for instance, 70%. 70% of all publishers now say that they would deploy header bidding.
Okay.
That was the idea. and if
Oh,
we
so
didn't-
just like if I have it, do I have a number? Can we
Yeah.
go the other way first?
Sure.
Oh, no.
Let me just ask, I guess 70, what's that based on? Because I saw. a
That
different
was
number.
the.
I think
Ad
Ad
Monsters.
Monsters.
That was the
Yeah.
Ad Monsters number.
So I saw the number was 10% of the top 1,000 sites.
Yeah, because then there was another article that was like, it's really in the teens.
Yeah,
And then if you go across
That's
the
not
globe,
true.
if you go into Asia.
It's
probably, I think it's somewhere in
Sounds like
between.
that, yeah.
I think it's in between.
No, no, no,
I think it's
It's
somewhere.
not
in between.
70.
But it's
It's
a
not
good
70,
point.
but it's not 10 either.
No.
It's not 10.
All right, so who has a number?
I have a couple.
Okay,
I'll,
let's hear
I'll
it.
do my
I have
best
two
too.
numbers too.
So one number is that with every 1 second delay in a page load, it can correlate to a 7% decline in sales and 16% decline in customer
Wait,
experience.
1 second delay, 7% decline in sales and
Per
6
second, yeah.
per second, and 16%.
Consumer experience,
Okay.
consumer satisfaction. That was from the Ad Reading Group a few years ago. And the second number is 532%, which was the increase in ROI that through a Forrester economic impact study that we recently did to marketers who adopted a full funnel omnichannel approach. So when I say the opportunity is real from the demand side, it is in terms of header bidding.
My number is a squishy, somewhere between 4 and 6 million queries per second is what some of the DSPs claim they listen to. That's a crazy number. Like queries per second is I mean it's more than most Wall Street firms. It's more than Twitter and Facebook have to deal with. It's a very large number, and most of it's garbage. So
How many true impressions are there in, if you,
nobody knows.
unique impressions? Give me, what's your guess?
Well, I'll tell you,
Off the top of your head.
If you think
The
about
entire
No, yeah, well.
Think about
You
it.
alone.
I know so I used to work for Outlook like a Google, so DFT is a pretty good proxy.
Okay.
Like, how many impressions does DFT have, which are largely non-duplicative? I would guess they're probably around 50 billion a month, in terms of non-duplicative, publisher-centric impressions.
Right,
And then you double that because you have Yahoo and other people don't use DFT.
Yeah.
So the entire
We've got some big
universe
guys
would
that
be
don't,
about
yeah.
100 billion, maybe a little more impressions per month.
Right, and you have some exchanges saying that they're doing trillion. So,
Mm-hmm.
there's the duplication and then.
And unlike financial
billion
markets,
is a
the
lot.
microtransactions.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Like I
That's a lot of
do
big.
2.5 billion by myself,
Okay.
Yeah.
so that's why I think that it was low.
Yeah, it's possible. It's possible. My data's a lot a day. It could be, what, order of magnitude 200 billion a month? 3? It's not a trillion.
I mean, we're 100 million uniques. So, we're
Yeah.
not the largest, we're not the smallest, but I would think the magnitude's higher.
Well, I guess my point about the QPS was that that 5 million QPS could easily be 1 million with no economic difference, except my AWS bill would go down a lot.
Other numbers.
2, which is related to a DigiDay article that recently came out about like with the genesis of the term header bidding. So when I think about header bidding as like hitting the tipping point about 2 years ago, and the massive amount of traction that it's gotten, and it's gone from client side, desktop, in-app, video, now we're talking about server side, and it's completely like really upended an industry within 2 years. Then I wonder like what does the next 2 years look like with header bidding and where we're going?
13% of impressions. We really didn't touch on this. The preferred deal and private auction space. It's really what flows actually of all the total impressions you see. Only roughly 13% go to that space. That
Go to
needs
the
really
private
grow.
account, go to the.
Yeah, that really needs to grow between, because that, you're talking about the connection between the publisher and the buy side. You need to bridge that gap, pull the buyers further up the yield curve, and really create higher overall yield for publishers. I think that's where we talk about the transaction of header bidding, but you don't talk about the connection there, and MediaMath jumping on perch. Those type of relationships will bridge that, address your KPI issue that matches there, addressing the ability for publishers then to get higher CPMs.
3. You.
No, I was gonna say, did you have?
Yeah, I found mine. So I didn't get the email, but I went back to a presentation that I did. So 385 was the average number of individual connections needed to load a page for a sample of about 20 different premium publisher websites that I took.
385 calls?
385 individual calls needing to load the entire page. So that includes images, text, everything. But the point why that's interesting is, so 385 individual calls. If you're running a client-side header bidding platform that has 10 or whatever, 8 different header bidders in it, those 10 or 8 different header bidders may be one of the first calls and may take up one of the open connections that you're limited in a browser. Usually it's about 10. I think Chrome, it's 10 open connections at once. So if you have 8 header bidders, you have 385 other things that need to use those open connections in order to load the page. So that's why shrinking down from having, say, 8 client-side to one for a server-side platform is really that important. Because the whole idea of, you know, everything runs at the same time, we're not going to interrupt your page, it's a bunch of bunk.
636. I've heard everything from between 500 and 1,000 is the peak number of ad networks that existed. This came from adnetworkdirectory.com.
Today, 636.
This might be at peak. This might be at peak, but whatever it is, it's an obnoxious number. No wonder there's fraud in our industry. But the whole thing, looking at this from someone with scars from many decades of ad operations and digital, the original SSPs came about to help us mediate all our ad networks. Each optimization attempt that was thrown on the poor ad ops guys, you'd have 20, 30 ad networks. So this is even pre-auction where some of the initial SSPs came in. Now those mediators are being mediated in header bidding. Can you guys all promise me that we're not going to be mediating the header bidders in 5 years? And because we've got, hopefully we won't have 600 SSPs. I don't think the economics are going to work, but we've got to stop this cycle. One, it does open up too much to fraud by having all these daisy changing things going on. But again, for folks in my line of work, it has been really hard to keep up with.
Okay.
Yeah.
$45.9 billion is the number that is predicted will be spent in programmatic display by 2019, which will account for 84% of the U.S. digital display revenue. And I think that is very much why there are 636 vendors out there, because everybody knows this is happening. Everybody's trying to jump into it.
And that's display, it doesn't even talk about
Display,
mobile.
and then we have 76.5% of all video ad dollars will be traded programmatically by 2019, which is 13.43 billion.
We don't have time to go into
Video, but I know.
videos.
That's not
Really
local, but
interesting
yeah.
topic.
Player bidding.
Yeah. So any, I'm sorry.
Your numbers.
Yeah. So 1%. 1% is everybody else's digital ad growth, whereas Google and Facebook get 40%.
And they probably get lumped in that programmatic.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. Yeah.
Any others? So I didn't ask for questions as we were going along because the discussion was so interesting, but any questions from people around the table?
I'm interested in the data consortium, right? Like, how do, both on the buy side and the publisher side, like, there's a couple of different initiatives where you had DigiTrust, and then you have like the recently announced LiveRamp, MediaMath, and AppNexus. Like, where do we go? Do we go to a DigiTrust, kind of like an independent consortium, or do we go something that's like more of like?
From our perspective, we wanted to do this. We have this product Connected ID, which is like a device graph, and what's cool about it living within the DSP is we can activate in real time. So when people are on mobile, we can, reach them on desktop and do sequential messaging and cool things like that around it. But where we fall apart is if our partners are all cookie based.
Yeah.
So by creating more of like an industry-wide device graph, I think we'll just be able to better identify, people have on average 3.64 devices, right? So the more you can kind of holistically connect their experience across all of them, it just creates a better consumer experience.
And is there a concern on the publisher side that it commoditizes like your data, right? So that you're thinking like, this is my user, and this is my Bloomberg user, like.
Yeah, so think of it and say like this is a Bloomberg user versus this isn't like a Wall Street Journal user, although that is important, there's better signals than that that you can find on your site that are better first party, right?
Yeah, at
So
this
for
point,
example, marketwatch.com, we have the watch list, which means people can load in where they get alerts and all that kind of stuff for any financial market, right? That's pretty valuable data, and you can only really get that data if, you know, come back.
I agree with that. I mean,
Yeah.
first of all, with the programmatic landscape being as large as it is, I work with lots of data providers to resell my users.
Yeah.
Why? Because they're gonna be bought programmatically. That's gonna help drive up the prices, right? That's really hard to prove, but it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
In the case of user matching, I'm working with LiveRamp, I'm working with Digitrust, I'll be working with ID5, and I'll work with whoever else I need to, because that will help me, right? Especially since I'm also a server. I'm gonna watch, you know, even though it's not a problem for me today, it's gonna increase as I benchmark.
And in my view, and you guys can correct me on the buy side if I'm wrong, it's like, they're more concerned with audience at this point, right? So if you can find signals beyond just like, this is this type of user from this type of publisher, those tend to be more indicative of what somebody is willing to do.
That's how
Yeah, a lot of
You know what I
it
mean?
is
Like-
creating the pipe, so like, you know, we work with a lot of DMPs, but if our cookie match with them is just, if it's just cookie based, then there's a loss there in terms of being able to really, activate users coming from them, let's say, onto it. And I mean, from a marketer's, I work with a really large marketer who is building their own, customer data lake, from whatever device graphs and whatever, and tying it into their, you know, Salesforce and account-based marketing solutions across channels. So it even goes beyond just like, you know, execution into like a holistic way that marketers are trying to, you know, communicate with their customers.
I think as long as these consortiums concentrate on the ID mapping, you know, as long as it's just this huge database of ID, ID, ID.
And we can all use it, you know
And we
what
can
I
all
mean?
use
Like,
it,
that's
then,
just
yeah,
better for
yeah.
us against the big guys, because they already have
And-
it.
and
Yeah,
knowing-
exactly.
The buyers will keep, you know, or the advertisers still have their proprietary data, we'll still have our proprietary
That's it.
data, but it'll all be taken in consideration with the transaction.
Mhm.
and that
Reconnect the
sharing.
dots.
Yeah.
I mean, because
It's actually safer, it's education, but I think it's safer for the publishers and the advertisers.
Yeah.
what is the greatest and biggest value of like Google, Facebook, Amazon is like the
Yeah.
ID, like
Yep.
being able to
Data.
know that this is like an addressable person
Mhm.
and who they are on their desktop mobile, all that kind of, that's the greatest value that they have that we don't.
Yeah.
Other questions from anywhere around the room? Yeah, please.
Question. So, full disclosure, I work at Google. It's been enlightening. But a question on, you talked about health and safety and transparency and trust in the market. I wondered if anyone had an opinion or has thoughts on what the IAB lab has been working on with ads.txt, if you've been on the publisher side implementing that, or on the supply side, have you been talking about that with your publishers, like, or what do you think about that? Is that positive?
We're gonna do it.
You are?
I mean, there's no reason why we wouldn't, right?
Right.
I mean, you look at us as a publisher, right? We are a premium publisher. We don't buy traffic, right? The majority of all of our traffic is organic SEO from Google. So we take proactive steps to block fraud, non-human traffic. We have integral ad science applied across everything. If somebody wants to turn on a camera, we do everything we can to be, again, as a publisher, transparent to protect our buyers, protect our users. So there's no reason why we wouldn't.
Exact same answer on all accounts, actually.
The only thing that worries about me about ads.txt is manual intervention is required. We've all seen, like every publisher we look at has legacy tags from a vendor they worked with 5 years ago. Are we gonna see the same kind of laziness, where they're not eliminating folks they're not working with, they forget to add someone they're working with? A little bit more, it's a great start, it's a great idea. A little level of automation would help because.
And even regional adoption, right? Because in the US is gonna lead it, but then if in EMEA and APAC, if they don't implement it, then it doesn't become a standard industry-wide across programmatic, right? So then it's definitely, I think it's definitely very valuable, especially for somebody working with like 30 demand partners, right? Where like you can make sure that somebody knows if I got that impression, like it was an authorized seller that helps you keep track.
But if
It's gonna help
You have to have the adoption.
The adoption has to start with the adoption starts with the DSPs, right? And so MediaMath already said they're adopting it, and many others have. If publishers see their revenue going down because they haven't done something, they will act.
Yeah.
It's like that. So as long as the demand side is adopting it, and it seems it's gotten great adoption already, or at least that there's been a lot of press about adoption, then I think it'll. I'm not too worried it won't. It
Well,
won't
on the
take
buy
off.
side, it has an advantage in that it can help us reduce our TPS.
Exactly.
Right? If someone says they're Bloomberg
Yep.
and they're not Bloomberg, we can start
Yeah.
throwing it out. It's likely, I think the most likely effect will be to increase revenue for publishers who adopt it.
Yep.
Publishers who don't adopt it probably won't have a negative effect for quite some time because it's unlikely DSPs would blacklist someone who didn't have text. We're
Right.
more likely to let the customer choose to only buy verified at some point, but that's like years away.
Right.
Like, we're just looking to get some critical mass of files out there, so it's a useful feature to build when there's only 3 or 4 publishers who've done it.
Right.
There's no real point.
I think your point is interesting in that header bidding is one of the few technologies that wasn't driven by the demand side, right?
Mhm.
So it was one of the, most of the things that have been adopted, certainly programmatic in general, was really driven by the demand side, and which the sellers were kind of promised something, but it was forced on them in many regards. And header bidding, somebody said earlier, was this fight in some sense to regain some control, and I have always thought that there's this big information disparity in the digital market between buyers and sellers, and some of that, I think, is transparency is addressing some of it, and header bidding certainly has addressed some of that. We are at the end of our time. I thank you all. It was a great discussion. I really appreciate it. I hope everyone enjoyed it. And hand for all of our participants, please.